A vote of no confidence. Somali legislators approve the sacking of the Prime Minister. External help. France deploys more soldiers to halt violence in the Central African Republic. And a universal language. We tell you about a musical rebirth in Mali. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, where we bring you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Famida Miller. It's 8 p.m. here in Nairobi, Kenya, 1 p.m. in Washington, D.C. and 1 a.m. in Beijing. Now, also coming up this hour. Nigeria could supersede South Africa as the continent's economic giant after rebasing GDP. Injuries and commitments force Kenya Rugby Sevens coach Paul True to rejig his team ahead of South African leg of the IRB. We begin in the Horn of Africa region, where Somalia's parliament on Monday passed a motion of no confidence against Prime Minister Abdi Fattah Shirdan. This development comes after a row with the president that's paralyzed the state and threatened a shaky recovery from civil strife. The Prime Minister, who was appointed last year, fell out with President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud over what some legislators say was a dispute over the composition of a new cabinet. The precise cause of the power struggle is unclear, but politicians have pointed to wrangling over alleged corruption, personal loyalties, as well as Somalia's complex clan politics, where each community expects to be represented in top state appointments. Shirdan, who left the parliament building before the vote, lashed out, saying he'd been barred from making a speech in his defense. The Prime Minister's deputies are expected to handle his duties until a replacement is found. Now, the feud between Somalia's president and the Prime Minister has been ongoing for months. Elected in September 2012, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, a political newcomer with a background in reconciling clan feuds, was seen as a vote for change. But he struggled to overcome acrimonious clan politics, corruption and a stubborn Islamist insurgency. A month later, Abdi Fattah Shirdan took over the Prime Minister's seat. In May this year, the Prime Minister faced a vote of no confidence for slowing down the pace of political reforms. But this was withdrawn after Mohamud lobbied parliamentarians. On November 12th, the Somali Prime Minister said he was in a constitutional dispute with the president and was ready for Parliament to intervene to settle it. It later emerged that the row centered around corruption related to the country's central bank. Let's now speak to CCTV's Mohammed Imoge, who joins us on the line from Mogadishu. Mohammed, if we look at these latest developments, why has there been a rocky relationship between the president and his prime minister?
Well, for me, that has been the case, actually, not only in this administration, but in all the other preceding administrations. If you consider the transition of federal administration, whose term came to an end on August last year, there was a similar situation. I think the problem is more on the political culture in the country and not about the constitution. The political culture there is more of clan-based that is quite acrimonious. But speaking about this specific case between the president and the prime minister, many believe it's about the performance issue of the prime minister, saying reforms have been quite slow. But then there are those members of parliament allied to the prime minister who will tell you that this has got to do with the impending cabinet reshuffle, and the prime minister and the president have fallen out on who to put on the new cabinet list. Therefore, either way you look at it, it is about the provisions of the constitutions that are not quite not followed to the letter, because the provisions of the constitution envisages a situation where both the president and the prime minister come to office on a political platform based on parties and not clans. That is basically what complicates the issue, Hamida.
Now, Mohammed, earlier we spoke about this row having paralyzed the state, and it's been going on for some time. So how exactly has this affected the running of the country?
Well, it did, because the loyalties have shifted since the president asked the prime minister about a month ago to step down, citing underperformance. citing performance issues. Most of the cabinet ministers have said they are not also feeling that they belong to the government that they feel has failed, and they have allied themselves to the president. And therefore, in all the cabinet sessions, ever since the president asked the prime minister to step aside, and which the prime minister said is a constitutional issue, not politics, and that parliament should intervene, all the following cabinet sessions have not been fully attended by all the cabinet ministers, all about the 10 cabinet ministers plus all the other assistant ministers. Therefore, the country has been working on a cabinet of less than 5. So you can imagine the decisions made by only 5 cabinet ministers headed by a prime minister that is not in good terms, that's not good terms with the president. Therefore, it has actually affected grossly the running of the government. And now Parliament has taken up its constitutional position to end the deadlock, and therefore it's up to the president to speed up the process of appointing another prime minister, which the Parliament has to approve.
All right, Mohammed, just before we wrap up, exactly how long could it take before a new prime minister is appointed?
Well, at the moment, it all depends on the pace of the president. The president first has to select, appoint a prime minister out of a number of options that he may have. But also in so doing, like I said, it has to do with the political culture, that he has to consider clan-allied nations. He has to consider a few other things, including which clan the prime minister has to come from, because the whole Somali system is based on a 4.5 basis, where the 4 big clans must share must take the lion's share. That is, the president has to come from a different clan from the prime minister. The prime minister has to come from a different clan from that of the speaker. Those are the 3 main positions. Therefore, immediately the president appoints the prime minister, he puts the name over to Parliament, and Parliament has to debate and approve. And when the Prime Minister is approved by the Parliament, then the Prime Minister has to again move speedily to form a cabinet position, has to effect a reshuffle and come up with a council of cabinet ministers, who again must go to Parliament for approval for media.
All right, Mohammed, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much there. Mohammed Imogre on the line from the neighboring capital of Nairobi. Now, more than 200 French troops are being deployed to the Central African Republic. This comes as rebels withdrew from the capital, Bangui. The extra soldiers arrived at Bangui on Sunday, taking the number of French troops to more than 600. Susan Mangeli reports.
French soldiers prepared Bangui's airport for the arrival of French troops. France announced its intention to deploy some 1,000 troops to the Central African Republic in a bid to stop a string of abuses allegedly carried out by militia gangs and ex-members of the mostly Muslim Seleka rebel coalition that toppled CAR's leader in a March coup.
We were in Libreville, where the unit was just finishing up a mission in the middle of the jungle, and their mission was to create a landing strip. After that, we took up this project and we came here by Antonov.
For everything to do with airports, our goal is also to advise and orient the airport directors. Our job is everything that has to do with airports. For example, this landing strip we have been asked to advise. We are coming here as experts on everything that has to do with the airport infrastructure.
On Sunday, 500 troops from neighboring Republic of Congo prepared to join the African-led MISCA force in the CAR, which has around 2,500 soldiers in place. The force has, however, failed to get off the ground due to lack of funds and training. The US has pledged to provide $40 million in assistance to the African Union-led peacekeeping mission in the country. Meanwhile, rebels began withdrawing from Bangui as efforts to improve security in the country got underway. This week, the United Nations Security Council will vote on a French-drafted resolution aimed at strengthening the African stabilizing force on the ground. That vote will be followed by a mini-summit on the CAR unrest in Paris on Saturday. Some 40 African leaders, including Central African Prime Minister Nicolas Tianganye, as well as the UN Chief Ban Ki-moon, will attend. Ex-President Francois Bozize was toppled by Seleka coalition and replaced with the country's first Muslim president, Michel Djotodia, who then formally disbanded the rebels. Human rights groups say ex-Seleka members, security forces and militia gangs are torturing and executing villagers and perpetrating widespread rape. The United Nations estimates that the latest strife has forced 400,000 people, or 10% of the population, to flee from their homes. Analysts warn that the conflict could engulf the country's neighbors. Susan Mongeli, CCTV.
Let's now take a quick break. When we come back, police fire tear gas as protesters demand the abolition of a new law restricting the right to protest.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need some trade and justice.
Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back. In Nigeria, hundreds of Islamist militants in trucks and a stolen armored personnel carrier attacked an Air Force base on the outskirts of the northern city of Maiduguri early on Monday. Officials say the daring attack has possibly left scores dead. The state government quickly ordered everyone to stay home and extended a nighttime curfew to 24 hours. The birthplace of the extremist Boko Haram movement, that's Maiduguri. The militants also attacked Maiduguri International Airport. That's according to officials, and airlines reported it has been closed. International flights to Maiduguri stopped months ago, but domestic flights had continued. The attack comes a week after the military bombarded forest hideouts of the Boko Haram terrorist network near the border with Cameroon with airstrikes and ground assaults. Now let's continue into Egypt, where the committee drawing up Egypt's new constitution has approved a final draft, a key step on the road back to democracy following the ousting of President Mohamed Morsi in July. A referendum on the draft is expected in January, but the new charter preserves the military's wide-ranging powers. CCTV's Adil Marui reports.
247 articles form Egypt's draft constitution, and at least 75% of the committee drawing up the draft voted for most of them.
This constitution is not about specific ideologies or principles. It's about the well-being of Egypt. In my opinion, the title of this constitution is social justice. It's the best I've ever read.
But critics say it gives unprecedented powers to the generals who ousted Mohamed Morsi. A defense minister can only be appointed with the armed forces' approval. Civilians can still face military trial despite popular calls for this power to be removed. The draft also bans the Islamist parties that controlled 75% of the seats in parliament after the 2012 elections. It empowers interim President Adli Mansour to decide whether to call parliamentary or the presidential elections first. He can also set quotas for minorities and other social groups.
There must be some awareness when discussing the controversial articles. The committee composed the constitution in only 2 months, but the constitution puts many burdens on the coming government, with healthcare and labor rights, while the country is barely meeting its current responsibilities, so there's a lot to be discussed and change in the future.
On the other hand, analysts say the draft provides a sound basis for freedoms, healthcare and education rights.
The chapter on rights and freedoms is more than perfect. The members of the committee did an excellent job, and it's clear that the constitution gained a consensus. But the most important role is society's. This will make the constitution effective.
Mansour has to ratify the document by Tuesday and then must schedule a referendum within 30 working days of receiving the official draft. There was a popular resentment to the 2012 constitution created by Islamists who supported ousted President Mohamed Morsi. This draft constitution, however, was formed by more inclusive powers, some of them Islamic. But the Muslim Brotherhood and their supporters are not participating. So it seems that once again, Egypt's constitution will not gain popular consensus. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
For more analysis on this issue, we're now joined live from our Cairo studios by Ahmed Naguib, founder of the National Committee for Defense of Civil Liberties and Rights. Thank you for joining us. Now, if we look at this draft, the final draft of the Constitution, it talks about banning political parties based on religion. Now, ultimately, this would ban the Muslim Brotherhood. How is that likely to be received? We did see our correspondent there, Adil Maruhi, talk about some issues around that.
Well, you have to understand that it is a new introduction, or they've introduced something new in the previous articles that was there, that it's going to be banned based on practices and its programs or the manifestos of those parties. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the FJP, which is the party representing the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Noor Party, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be banned immediately, but that they're going to have to introduce new programs and be very careful in how they manage their parties, because supposedly on the way they registered previously is that they're civil parties, not based on religious with religious background. So it's still vague how it's going to happen, but you have to understand that the Noor Party is backed up by Saudi Arabia, and to push them to vote yes for this referendum to be voted yes by a big part of the Islamic sphere, they will be given some sort of a special status to continue. And for the Muslim Brotherhood, there will be definitely talks and negotiations about whether if they accept to be part of the process, they will be offered to continue as a party but not as a group. Those are issues still up in the air, but the time will unfold and we'll find out exactly what the agreements were.
All right, Mr. Naguib, if we look back at the previous constitution, it was passed by an overwhelming majority, but there was only a 33% turnout to pass that constitution. What are we looking at this time, especially wanting an approval?
Well, you have to understand the history of referendums in the world, and specifically Egypt, that they always somehow pass. There's always a vote for yes of confidence to those referendums. The question would be, how big of a vote would that constitution get? Would it be a landslide like above 65 and 70% as the first referendum in 19th of March? In 2011, or will it be a small majority, somewhere between 50 to 55%, showing a division in the country and the nation's agreement on this constitution, not having enough support? A lot of people consider that the vote for yes is actually a vote of confidence of the roadmap introduced by the military in 2013 in June.
All right, Mr. Naguib, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this evening. We're speaking there to Ahmed Naguib, founder of the National Committee for Defense of Civil Liberties and Rights in Cairo. Now, China has successfully launched its Chang'e 3 lunar probe to the moon from the Xichang Satellite Launch Center in southwestern China. It's the first time a Chinese spacecraft will land on the surface of an extraterrestrial body, and the first time a rover will land on the moon in 4 decades. Chang'e 3 is aiming to follow the successes of the Chang'e 1 and Chang'e 2 missions in 2007 and 2010. Hanbin has the details.
It's regarded as the most ambitious lunar mission by China. The Long March 3B rocket carried the Chang'e 3 lunar probe and rover into orbit before they unfolded their solar panels. Many technologies are being used to ensure the probe makes a safe landing in low gravity conditions. The lunar program will also see breakthroughs in remote control between the moon and the Earth, like the use of a high-frequency X-band observation system.
If we successfully use the X-band, in the future we can use this tracking network to perform a Mars mission. It's very important.
Chang'e 3 is part of the second phase of China's 3-step robotic lunar exploration program of orbiting and landing probes. followed by a mission to collect samples of the moon and return them to Earth. 10 years ago, China became the third country after Russia and the United States who independently put an astronaut into orbit. Today, it is sending a sophisticated lander and rover to the moon. The Chang'e 3 will help bring the country a step closer to a manned lunar mission. Han Bin, CCTV at the Beijing Aerospace Control and Command Center.
Here in Africa, Ethiopia too is reaching for the skies. The country spent close to $300 million on a space center and plans its first satellite launch in 2016. CCTV's Giram Chala has more.
The Ndoto Hills, just north of Addis Ababa. It is from here that Ethiopia is preparing its mission to space. The country is busy training science in rocket science and wants them to send up its first satellite in 3 years.
These satellites are not only for commercial, but for research purpose also too. Then we have a plan to launch satellite which will be used for peaceful purpose for the next 3 to 5 years.
Already, the Ndoto Center has a functioning observatory.
This is a 1-meter telescope, and as any other telescopes, it functions by taking light from the universe, from any celestial object, grabs the light, focuses through the mirrors, and will send the image or the light to be processed to the cameras and the computer, which is located in the control room.
The prospect of Ethiopia joining the race into space, even nearly 60 years after the first satellite launch, has excited many here.
I think it's great. I mean, being Ethiopian and all, it's really not expected from us. Not a lot of people expect Ethiopia to launch a satellite.
Actually, it's a really amazing thing, and it's kind of a miracle to Ethiopia.
All being well, the 2016 satellite will be just the first. Ethiopia is hoping the data it sends back will help develop mining and farming and improve security. Grumjala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
We'll have more for you after this break, including universal language. We tell you about a musical rebirth in Mali. Welcome back. Stigma and discrimination are the two big issues impeding the fight against HIV/AIDS in Nigeria. Persons living with the disease in the country say they suffer unspeakable discrimination even from close family members. And some experts argue that stigma and discrimination, rather than the disease, are the main cause of death of those living with the virus. Our Nigeria correspondent Deji Bajamas has more on the story.
Stigma and discrimination remains the biggest hurdle in the fight against HIV and AIDS in Nigeria. The country's National Agency for the Control of AIDS, NACA, estimates that 3.1 million people live with HIV/AIDS in Nigeria and that there are 300,000 new infections every year. The prevalence rate is 3.6%. While these statistics do not leave any cheering news, what is really a serious cause for concern is that not much is known about those who contract the new infections. They are not coming out to disclose their status for fear of being stigmatized and discriminated against. And that, in turn, is driving the spread of the disease.
If I had not disclosed my status,
I had just been there.
No one knows this better than Abigail, who's been living with the disease for several years now and has suffered untold discrimination.
It's not an easy thing to just go out there and disclose, because so many times, like, for example, you come out on the TV like this, the moment you step out there, you know, people tend to react in a different manner.
It is that reaction that is making disclosure quite an agony for those who have the disease. This young mother of two who has been living with the virus for several years now got her first root shock of stigma when the friend she was living with discovered she had tested positive.
My friend that I'm living with packs my load out, that the nurse has already told her that I'm a positive living person, that I cannot stay with her. So I pack my loads and I leave.
The sad reality is that besides feeling the spread of the disease, stigma and discrimination are gradually creating another serious problem: poverty.
The recurring decimal is poverty. People who are HIV positive get retrenched from their employment. They get discriminated. At the end of the day, they have no employment. And when they have no employment and they have no drugs, they die. I mean, you can imagine the consequences.
Experts say at least 7 out of every 10 persons publicly known to have the HIV virus in the country have either lost their jobs or do not have one. What further compounds the issue is that governments across the country do not appear to be doing enough to fight the problem. Less than 5 of the 36 states in the country have laws against discrimination and stigmatization of persons living with HIV and AIDS. The country's national parliament is even lagging behind in this regard. So far, it has not been able to pass a national anti-stigma law. DJ Badmos, CCTV, Lagos, Nigeria.
While South Sudan gained independence in 2011, over the last 2 years, it's seen outbreaks of violence that have left hundreds of dead and many others displaced. But in an interesting turn of events, traditional wrestling is now being used to promote a sense of unity among the still divided communities.
It's match day in South Sudan's capital. All roads lead to Juba Stadium, where the two-time champion Jonglei State is taking on Lake State. With ash applied on his body and determination glinting in his eyes, Alipaya Malith waits his turn to enter the arena, which is full of a cheering crowd. The young athlete from Jonglei gives everything he has to knock his opponent down and achieve tribal glory amid wild cheers. But he's also wrestling for a cause he believes in.
But the importance of wrestling is to reconcile the youth of different communities. They know each other. But the problem, the causative of the problem is when you are suspicious. If you don't know somebody, you can suspect him.
For years, the tribes of South Sudan have fought over pasture and raided each other's cattle. But on this day, the common cultural ground of wrestling is being used to unite the still divided communities in the world's newest country.
This is a good game. We will be happy even if we have lost to the people of Jonglei State. We're like children from the same mother and father. And if we had won, it would have been the same. I'm very happy today. This sport should be organized every year.
The residents believe wrestling matches will unite them. There are high hopes of a peaceful coexistence among the 62 tribes of South Sudan if such events foster the spirit of togetherness. Maria Galang, CCTV.
To West Africa now, where a cross-cultural musical collective known as Africa Express is releasing an album next week aimed at highlighting Mali's musical talent and revitalizing the country's music scene. The release of Maison des Jeunes comes just months after Islamist militants were pushed out of northern Mali by French-led military intervention. The Islamists had imposed the strict Islamic Sharia law in the north, banning secular music in a country where music is a part of life. CCTV's Kate Parkinson reports from Bamako.
In Mali, music is everywhere.
It's the country's most famous cultural asset, the glue that holds the troubled nation together, and the bridge that connects its past with its present. So when armed militant groups moved to ban music in rebel-held territories last year, it was for many Malians an unimaginable tragedy.
I dare not imagine this, because for me, it would never be possible to cut off or eliminate music from the Malian society. I can imagine everything, but not that. In fact, music is inside us. It's like the way you need to eat and drink. We also need music.
In October, British musician Damon Albarn brought his Africa Express musical collective here to Bamako. Their mission? To write and record an album in just 7 days and showcase some of Mali's many talented musicians. Subo by Songhoi Blues is one of the tracks on the Africa Express album. The band, who are all from the north of Mali, say the opportunity to take part in the cross-cultural musical collaboration came at the perfect time.
I think that is the moment, the most appropriate moment, because Mali has just come through a crisis like it's never seen before. So with Demon, we know that our music is traveling far away, beyond the borders of our country. It's an honor for us to know that our culture is being seen, even in places where we are not. It's a great honor for us.
The Malian musicians involved in Africa Express will perform in London at the album launch party next week, taking Malian music onto the global stage at a time when more than ever Malians want their voices to be heard. Kate Parkinson, CCTV, Bamako in Mali.